Welcome, everyone. Day 2 of Eon. So excited. It's been yesterday was so much fun, and I'm like just blown away. I did a LinkedIn post.
Welcome, everyone.
Wait, I need to
Day
pause my
2 of
YouTube feed.
Eon.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I'm super excited for everyone to be here today. Yesterday's conversations were a lot of fun. We talked, I think it was the perfect way that we could have kicked off Eon. We started with taking a look at, people who are building these programs. We had a CEO and a founder. We had the director of career services and success. We had a career coach, and the conversations were really interesting at what boot camps excel at. Followed by, talking to the grads themselves and really talking about the human side of the impact these programs have. So day 2 is a little bit different. It's gonna be really all about the employer and how you fit into that picture. Today's topic is something that I've had numerous conversations with, whether it's employer partners or the faculty and staff at bootcamp institutions, in-house here at Mint Bean, with regarding the tech talent shortage and how difficult it is hiring bootcamp grads. There are a lot of challenges, not just bootcamp grads, actually, how difficult it is hiring developers. And I sometimes feel that when you're talking to grads and students who are looking for work, there's a lot of frustrations of like, I'm being ghosted, or there's 5 or 6 interviews. Like, I don't fully understand why they're making me do a test that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the job. So we're going to kind of touch on a lot of these things of like, why is their methodology all over the place? What is the science behind it? And hopefully make sense of it all. And before we start, let's do a quick round of intros. I'm going to do a quick intro, but I really want everyone to spend some time in telling us a little bit more about, what you do and how we can help move this conversation forward. So I'm going to go around this way. In my box, I see Lupe. So thank you so much for joining this conversation. I'm super excited to have the global manager of partnerships at all of GA with us today. And I know that you work with a lot of different employer partners to make sure that GA has a very successful hiring pipeline of partners that are constantly working with bootcamp grads. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Lupe Colangelo. I use she, her pronouns, and my background is really in coaching, but more recently I've been managing our employer partnerships team at General Assembly. So I'll talk about me in a moment, but General Assembly is a boot camp, and we have immersive programs, 3 months long in UX design, data science, software engineering, ton of classes and workshops and short form boot camps that people can take to upskill. But my team's role is really to work directly with employers. And so I'm speaking to employers all day, every day, and supporting our grads and our candidates in finding that role after our program. So I definitely understand the challenges of both sides of the conversation. But a little bit about my background. Started in coaching, so I have a psychology background, really interested in helping people kind of get over the finish line in the career side of things. And I was a career coach at General Assembly for over 2 years. So I was working really closely with our students. One common thread was always our work with employers. And I just, happened to have really great relationships with them. I thought it was a lot of fun. I love advocating for bootcamp grads across the board. It's such a great diverse population. It's a really great chance to change lives, especially with people who are coming from underrepresented backgrounds. So that's something I've always been really passionate about. And I'm really lucky that in the employer partnerships manager role, I get to really make, relationships that last and like get to see the effect of those lives being changed. I'm so happy to be here and talk a little bit more about what I've experienced. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. That was amazing. What I really liked about your background was the fact that, like you said, you have a psychology background and you've been a career coach for such a long time, and even before you joined General Assembly, and then now you're working with employers. So I thought that perspective was so interesting. Like when you've built so many one-on-one relationships with students and grads, and you've seen the challenges that they're facing, and now you're kind of on the other side of the table where you're talking to employers. Before we move on, I'd love to maybe ask you if you could maybe pinpoint one challenge, what's that one challenge that you see with your employer partners when it comes to hiring bootcamp grads?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, the misalignment that I see, I think there, one thing that could be controversial to say is that I don't think there's a shortage of tech talent. I think there's so much talent out there. I think the challenge is alignment sometimes between the scaffolding of experiences that companies can offer. Because for development, for example, it's not just a flat line of everyone who's a software developer has the same experience. This is an industry that's been emerging for so fast. And so we actually see, we have experienced devs, but then there's a new emerging field of junior devs that's being, getting into the market. And so I think employers and grads are constantly having to align on like, what support do employers take responsibility for? Like, what does good onboarding mean for a junior developer? What does a good training program look like for a junior developer? What courses and recordings, can be provided to help these people educate and start their careers versus what's expected of the developers, right? How can people who are interested in coding take the first step, take the 10th step? How can they keep growing? So it's an industry that's really working itself out. So long story short, I think the challenge is just getting aligned as an industry on what we're expecting from employers versus junior devs. But I think we're getting there. I think a lot of great conversations are happening like this one. I think it's a very positive outlook, even if there are challenges involved.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna pause that, but I want to explore that further of like what training looks like and who's doing it right, and what can be done better. So we'll come back to that. Lesha, thank you so much for joining this conversation. I'm super excited to have someone with your expertise on the panel. You are someone that, by the way, Lesha is the director of career success at Full Stack Academy. She's worked in both sort of institutions. She's worked in universities. It was the NYU School Stern, I believe. And she's worked with student engagement. So it's really interesting with having a more traditional experience on the faculty side, and now with bootcamp grads. I think your insights are super invaluable for this conversation, and I'm very excited to have you on the panel.
Thank you for that, Navi, and thanks for having me here. It's really great to meet everyone. Like Navi said, my name is Lesha Harhai, pronouns she, her, and I am the Director of Career Success at Full Stack Academy. I've been with Full Stack for about 2.5 years. We are an EdTech services organization in the bootcamp space and have programs on software engineering, web development, cybersecurity. And as of this week, we have actually just launched our first data analytics cohort. Literally the first program took place last night with our Virginia Tech partnership, and we'll be launching our DevOps cohort also, I think, later on in October, if everything is going according to Steam. So we do much of the same thing that the team at General Assembly does. So I oversee the team that provides both career development and coaching support and the employer relations facing team. I was actually brought on board to Full Stack when I started to reinvigorate their employer relations program to provide some consistency and structure around it, and really build out a full-fledged employer-facing program to basically mirror the support that we were providing our students on the coaching side. Like Navi said, I spent 10 years at NYU. I was part of the NYU Stern School of Business undergraduate college, both working kind of in student-facing, student life, all of those things. I have a master's in higher education. So that experience was really relevant to there. Have always worked in the especially with certain students who are so career oriented, there's definitely a lot of parallels with boot camp students and what we're seeing with the alums we see graduate from our programs. And then I spent another 5 years running recruitment at NYU. So if for any employers on the call, if you were reaching out to recruit from NYU across the board, you were likely talking to me. So nice to see you all. Again, I took a 1-year sabbatical that I like to say from the higher ed space and went to go do Citi MBA investment banking recruiting for a year, which was a very interesting experience to be on the other side as an employer, and then was really grateful for the opportunity to come back into the higher ed education space as the director of career success at Full Stack. So really excited for today's conversation. I have to plus one everything Lupe said. I do not think we have a tech talent shortage. I agree that I think it is a working alignment towards figuring out how employers need to be involving boot camps into their pipelines, what that looks like from an HR perspective, a training perspective, an engineering team perspective, because I think probably a lot of the engineers, hiring managers on the call are saying we 100% see the value of a boot camp student in our pipeline. We just need to convince everybody else. We need to say to the people that I've gone to the NYUs and the Columbias to their CS programs, how recruiting from a full stack, from a GA, from a Flatiron, from an App Academy is something invaluable in terms of making sure we have a fully fledged, diverse, inclusive pipeline for hiring needs.
Absolutely. I think that this is exactly why we wanted to do EON. I think you nailed it with there's a shift that's happened. I graduated from GA about 4 years ago. And I remember there was the conversation of convincing even employers as a candidate, you faced it with almost every single employer, which is not the case anymore. So that means that all the innovative companies have already done the switch in their minds. And a lot of the larger players you guys are doing such an excellent work when it comes to the employer relationship. So I think that there's a lot of kudos that need to be given to, what the work that happens inside that no one sees, and they just kind of see the criticism that the industry receives. So I'm very grateful for you to be on this conversation. And, to your, when I was looking at your LinkedIn, I saw that you were in Citi for a year, and I was like, okay, maybe Lesha was, because I saw that you eventually moved to the recruiter manager role at NYU, and I'm like, maybe she really enjoyed it and was like, okay, let me dip my toes in recruitment, and then was like, no, I'm going to go back to what I was doing. I really love that more.
It's 100% what happened, and this is no disrespect to anyone who has made their living on the recruitment side. I think I'm not, it might be an ageist thing to say. I think I was a little too old to be a traveling recruiter. And this was prior to the pandemic. So I was on a plane every week and it was a little like the life management style of coming from an NYU environment where, the summers were quiet. We had winter break off, definitely not the scope and financial services. And then, it was really great because at that time I had been approached about the role at Full Stack Academy. And it was just too good of an offer not to take to kind of return to my roots. So it was a very good experience. I'm glad to have known what life was like as an employer, but I am very happy to be back on the side supporting students as opposed to recruiting them into my own organization.
Yeah, us too. We're happy to have you in that role as well. And I'm sure your students as well. So thank you for being on this panel. I'm super excited for this conversation. Monarch, where do I start introducing you?
I can do it myself. Let
me at least do an opener. For those of you that are not aware on the call, Monarch and I are co-founders at Mint Bean, and we're also life partners. He's my husband, and I have without sounding corny, I have a lot of admiration for the work that he does. He's actually one of the reasons why, stop shaking your head. He's one of the reasons why I actually joined tech. We both graduated with a finance background, and that was right when the global financial meltdown was going on, and there were no jobs in finance. he decided to pivot, and that was your first pivot. And he opened up a Java book, and and was a self-taught developer. And I went down in the corporate finance route, and I saw sort of like his struggle to break into the industry, and I saw the success of it as well. And 6 years later, he was, like I said, he was one of the reasons why I wanted to jump into this industry, because there's just so much. Like, it's not just the paycheck, but it's just an industry that I feel values people and human potential. So thank you for being on this panel, Monarch. The work that the reason why I really wanted him to be on this conversation is because in the last year, we've brought in about a little over, I want to say like 10 or 12 bootcamp grads. I think the number is 12. And all of them were under Monarch's guidance and mentorship. So I think there's a lot of insights into what he could share about why hiring developers is so hard, and what that model looks like, and how to actually take what you should do when you're thinking about hiring developers, particularly junior developers, and the insights he can share as an employer. So Monarch, thank you for being on this panel, and please introduce yourself if I've left anything out.
Thanks for the great intro. Well, let me I know you like saying this, Navi, so let me take a step back. And I kind of want to just introduce myself. I think a lot of people in the room know me. Lesha and Lupe, we just got to know each other just before the call. For those who don't know, I started my software development journey 10 years ago. Well, not quite 10, it's like a little less than 10. And back then, Ruby on Rails was massive, but my friend had a Java book, and boot camps were still this. Frankly, people saw boot camps back then, 8 years ago, as this shady industry that was a scam, and that's how they looked at it back then. Things have progressed to the point where Navi decided to go to GA. How many years ago? I think 3 or 4 years ago, and that was a great experience. And now employers are starting to hire more and more from companies, but from boot camps. But I decided to go down the self-taught route. I would not recommend it to anyone. It has its pros, but I think boot camps are just the better way to go. I mean, if you value your time, it's just the better way to go. They teach what I learned in 1 year. They teach in like probably half their curriculum is like in 6 weeks, they'll teach you what I learned in 1 year. In the next 6 weeks, they'll teach you stuff that's industry relevant. I took, I think, a month to learn what a for loop even does. So, well, fast forward, we basically started Mintbean because of that experience that I went through. Like, frankly, like that's kind of where the inspiration came from. And it was joined by Navi's struggle from being a bootcamp grad, and that's where we came up with the idea of Mintbean. Hey, what if we just created a community where developers of all backgrounds, not just boot camps, but we have university graduates and self-taught developers as well, could come to a non-judgmental, totally judgment-free safe zone where they could ask the stupid questions, or at least the questions that they think are stupid, and get straight answers and help them get forward, not just technically, but also career-wise. And I think the biggest thing that I'm bringing to the table over here is I don't have the breadth of experience that Lupe and Lesha have. They talk to employers all day, every day. But Lesha has actually worked on the employer side at Citi. So I worked under a manager who came from Citi, and I learned a hell of a lot from that person. So a lot of respect for Citi over there, because I know the quality of software engineering that you guys have at Citi. And I just felt like in the beginning, when I started hiring developers for my own company, I didn't think about hiring university grads at all. The first person that we hired was a software engineer who dropped out of university, and he was the best hire that I could have made in that point in time. Just excellent person. We've hired 10 bootcamp graduates this last year. And I guess I'll start kind of moving towards the conversation that we have today. We had to innovate to fit what we were doing was we were building software for other companies. So we were like a shipyard. People would come to us, we'd build a product and ship it. And we just hand over that shipped product to them, to our clients. And we had to innovate our processes in order to fit this new supply that was coming out of boot camps. So boot camps were graduating people who maybe didn't have a comp sci degree, so I couldn't really talk smart, quote unquote, to them. I couldn't go and start implementing object-oriented patterns. I probably couldn't use static typing. But they were graduating with relevant skills. So what we actually had to do was we actually had to change our entire delivery process to accommodate this new supply that was coming in, and it paid out really well. Like, it was just the best decision we could have made. The deal at MintBean was and still is, and I think will probably, not always, but at least for the foreseeable future, be you come in, we give you your first step into the industry. If we hire you on, you're going to get straight mentorship from me. You're going to work on real projects. You're not going to be babied. You will be thrown in the deep end, and we'll only hire the ones who have the skills and the communication skills, not just the technical, but also the communication skills, and deserve the job. I know this is somewhat controversial, and Navi is asking me not to say this on the air, but just by personality, I am personally gender blind and colorblind. I know that there's controversy around that, but that's just who I am. And at one point, we just had a completely diverse team, all different ethnicities, all of them women except me. So it's like we had the opposite problem of diversity, where I had to go and do diversity hires for men. And we couldn't have had that level of diversity and all of those different perspectives if we had not hired from boot camps. If we had gone out and hired from universities, we probably wouldn't have been able to compete with with other companies that were hiring from university programs. We wouldn't have been able to, I wouldn't have been able to mentor them on anything. They would have, from previous experience, they would have come into our company with preset notions of what software engineering and computer science is all about. And as the French say, we would have to de-educate them before we could educate them. Not so with bootcamp grads. So there's a lot that bootcamp grads are bringing to the table. What do we do from here? I don't know. I believe in Say's law because I've experienced it. Supply creates its own demand. So I think the industry is going to shift, and they're going to change their processes much like we did. Lesha, Lupe, help me out over here. I'm running out of things to say. Have you guys seen employers maybe change their own hiring processes or their delivery processes to accommodate for bootcamp grads?
We could probably spend an entire panel just talking about this particular one, but I would say absolutely. I think what what I've learned at Full Stack over the last couple of years is that it just takes one. And I wonder if this is something that Lupe would agree with, because for an employer to take a quote unquote chance to extend an offer, to onboard, to hire, to train, to mentor, what we have seen be very successful is that if that experience is very positive, they will come back to us. They will come back and say, okay, find me someone. And I've had countless employers come back and say, okay, I hired X student. I want to see the next version of X student. So I think there is credibility, Monarch. I think the employers changing their demand about saying, okay, we're going to take the chance on one, see how it goes. And all it really takes is one. We've even, worked with our partners here in New York City through, organizations like the Tech Talent Pipeline and New York City's Economic Development Commission, where people are creating pipeline opportunities, whether they're apprenticeships. And we even say an apprenticeship program doesn't, and you can still call it a program, it doesn't need to be 15, 20, 50, 100 individuals. Like some of these City used to enroll, hundreds of summer interns, hundreds on the MBA side, hundreds from different graduate schools. But an internship or an apprenticeship program doesn't need to be 10, 15, 20 people. It could be one person. It could be one person that allows you to pilot this out, to put together a team, to do some of those things. And then you figure out through your HR partnership, through your training and development organization counterparts, through the engineering teams that you're working with, how does this embed yourself into your organization and your culture into a lot of real ways that you can then scale it throughout other, business needs within your engineering team, other departments within the tech space of your organization. So yeah, I've had a lot of employers come back to us and say, we'd like to formalize something now. We'd like to know what a more consistent pipeline would look like. And I think that's The one challenge around that is that employers have had to shift their mindset from this December, January, May, August graduation pool, or saying that we must recruit everyone in their sophomore year for a junior internship so that they convert into a full-time offer on the, after they graduate. Those are models that take time. And I think somebody said it in the comments. We're dealing with a population of people that are really only working with what they were taught to do. So what they're doing isn't wrong. It's just a little maybe outdated, and it just needs to be refreshed with an inclusion eye to say, okay, how can we get these people who are available today on the day that they graduate, as opposed to waiting 6 months until they finish a degree program.
Yeah, man, that was, there's a couple of things I want to reflect on for a second. I do say that to Monarch, that don't say this publicly, but that's because usually the people that say that, they're saying it in a context that's actually not healthy. And I think that the reason why we have been so successful when it comes to diversity in the team is because our sourcing is correct, right? When you're looking, like, you're not looking at the problem at the end of the funnel, but you're looking at you're looking at it sort of at the very top, like who's going in your hiring pipeline, where are you sourcing your talent? And what you said about Lisha, about the one person changing minds, it's really interesting. When my experience in the bootcamp program changed Monarch's mind, and a lot of our own friends who are in engineering, about the power of bootcamp grad. So there's and again, like, I want to go back to, this is why we wanted to do EON, because I truly feel that there's a lot of criticism that the industry receives, but then it's like, how do we change the work that you guys all do with employers, especially in changing their minds and going, okay, just hire one, just hire one grad and see if you like it, and then we'll have this conversation again. I know companies still that like hire apprenticeships and internships from traditional models that don't even want to look at bootcamp grads. And it's like you said, it's changing minds. And once they do make that hire, it's interesting, like how their perspective changes on the whole industry and the value of a bootcamp grad. So having said that, I want to go back to the problem of why hiring developers is so hard. So I want to ask each of you that question. Like, what are the challenges that you're seeing from the position that you're seeing that from? So let's go from Lupe, and then we'll go up to Monarchs.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, I 100% agree with what Lesha was saying. I think the problem is not is the profile of a grad a really great fit. I think, once they're in, they're really successful. And I think, to Monarch's point, really what I try to advocate to employers in nicer terms is kind of just like, get with it, get with the industry, get with how things are going, because I think it's such a value to be adaptable. And I think there's a place for everyone. I think college computer science degree grads have such a place in this industry. Like, they're the ones who have this deep conceptual knowledge of what's going on. Like, if a company is doing it right, they should be creating pathways for both types of experiences. Like, I think there's a really great place for CS grads, and bootcamp grads, I think, really fill a unique need of being really quick to onboard. This is just feedback that we're hearing from employers, really quick to onboard. And also, it's kind of feels like we're all on the same team in the bootcamp space, which is great. Cause I know, I've had grads interview where the hiring manager was a full stack grad, and they're like, no, I get it. Like, I want you to succeed. So it's a really nice kind of place to be. But to your question, Navi, I think some of the challenges that employers have are also just lack of resources. So it's one thing to say, yeah, get with it. But I think when you really think about it, I also have a lot of empathy for the employer side, because they might not always have the resources to create content that will help really onboard people correctly. They might not have the HR resources. They might just be understaffed. And when they say they need someone to jump right in, that's the case. They may or may not be the best fit for a bootcamp grad just yet, which is fine. And I think, a lot of companies are trying to get to that place. I will say some things that have helped overcome that challenge has been skills-based hiring. So sending out technical assessments to help screen candidates. sourcing, like you said, Navi, making sure that you're reaching out to the right communities and making sure that you're reaching out to pools of, talent who might have been overlooked in the past, bootcamp grads, CS grads, making sure that you're exploring the full talent pool to figure out what's right with, what your company really needs. And then also, I think one way to overcome this challenge is really creating evergreen onboarding content. So like using the power of video trainings, things that can be replicable over time, because if you're helping, the profile of a bootcamp grad is someone who can learn really quickly. So these are people who just went through like 3+ months of just learning, and they're so good at it. So if you give them the scaffolding, whether it be resources that already exist or whether it be trainings that your team creates, they're going to learn it. They're going to be really good at it, and they're going to provide a unique perspective. So I think, to kind of sum it up, I think, employers might be faced with the challenge of like, where do I start? I would say just start by creating the space for both types of experience levels, and you'll be just fine, and you'll have a more diverse team anyway. And then you can figure out, what are the strengths of both to really pursue that.
Interesting. I want to take that one step further before I ask you guys the questions. So you said onboarding. I agree. I think onboarding junior talent, whether it's coming from boot camp or whether it's coming from self-taught or whether it's coming from comp sci, there's a challenge, right? There's a challenge of having a mentor, or I've seen the conversations in our community where I'm on a team, and Monarch, you've supported so many developers in the community that come back and say, hey, we don't have the right mentorship on the team that I just started on, or my mentor doesn't, or I don't feel comfortable asking the right questions to my team lead, or I don't like, there's no real resource of like, who should I go to and what should I ask? What I kind of want to know, what is the bootcamp institution doing to help these grads and students that it's like, the way that I look at, I've talked about this before, right? So you kind of have this really short, jam-packed curriculum where it's like there's some boot camps out there that do 9 weeks, which I think are a little bit too short. So you have like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year, whatever time frame that may look like. And then there's the incubation period where you go back and you're like, okay, well, that was a lot of information. Now I need to process it, and I need to digest what I just learned, and maybe pick up new things. And that could look different depending on just like the individual, anywhere from 1 month to a year. And then they land their first job, and it's like the work isn't done yet, right? Because it's like even being the mentee is, I would say, like, there's a skill to that, like, asking the right questions, Googling the right things, which you sort of pick up in the incubation period. But then it's like, how do you work with mentors, which I think it's a skill on its own. What's the institution, the bootcamp institutions? We'll talk about GA. Have you guys thought about that, of like how to support developers when they break into tech? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I could speak to GA for sure. And I would also love to hear what Lesha has to say, because I know, some of the content might look different depending on our immersives too. For developers, well, one, we partner with MintBean. So I think it's important to make sure that it's not just a plug for that, but I think like the power of hackathons is there's self-taught after the immersive. You go back to the foundations, you have to relearn all the things, but you have to show that experience. And I think that goes back to an employer's challenge, which is like, what have you done after GA or the bootcamp that you took? What did you do after full stack, right? What did you do to keep building your skills? So we have them, enroll in as many hackathons as possible, or do passion projects and or freelance. So the power of freelancing is learning how to self-scope a project with limited mentorship, but we're also pushing people to get mentors and do that networking, to ask the right questions. And I think the coaches on both of our teams are helping them really tailor their networking to do it right. So to answer your question, they're really being coached to learn how to network so that they know how to get mentored. The only thing I'll add is just for our UX program, we actually have them work with clients for the last leg of their program to showcase that experience. And then we've created this content for them at the end of the program into their job search, so they can keep going at their own pace, but it gives them a kind of structure that they need for building experience. So There are a lot of different ways to continue that learning, but we do push them to network, and we create a ton of resources for them to network, because if they can do that right in their job search, there's a much easier transfer for them to be successful when they actually start working.
Thank you for that. I think that was I'm looking at the chat, and there's like a lot of interesting things that everyone's talking about, teaching developers how to quickly self-teach on the job. I think is probably one of the most key things that the institution I feel does really well. But let's come back to the question of why hiring developers is so hard. I think that was a lot, and we could probably go into what Lupe just shared in its own panel. But yeah, let's come back to the question of why hiring developers is so hard. Lisha, what are your thoughts?
I think you also have to think about it from the internal kind of employer side. So coming from that lens, and again, I worked with MBA investment bankers, not software developers when I was at Citi, but I know the experience and worked closely kind of with the recruiters who are working on the tech team. And I think the thing that we have seen is you also have to remember that the people who are hiring, their job isn't to hire. And I think we've all probably worked on teams where we've had to hire, onto our own teams. In addition to the work that I do as the director of career success, and I know the work that Lupe is doing as, the head of global partnerships, to then have to hire into your own team is a whole nother job. You're spending another basically 40 hours a week plus looking at resumes and all of those things. And you have to juggle the priorities. So I think that's actually a big challenge of understanding that engineers, engineering managers, HR professionals, HR is really the only one whose job it is really to hire as a field. But they obviously cannot make the final decisions from an engineering manager perspective or a CTO perspective. So I think sometimes what happens that creates a challenge in terms of hiring any student, whether it's a boot camp grad or a CS grad, is the alignment between internal factions within an organization. Are they on the same? Is the role properly scoped? Does the recruiter who's recruiting for the role understand? And I've seen some comments, and it's laughable, but it's not, about why we're, it's entry-level pay for senior work. Why can't we just say, I need a senior person and I'm willing to pay that? That's also probably another panel that we could have about the misscoping of pay versus, work that's done in the tech space in general. But I think that's something that comes along. And we've actually seen that with our cybersecurity bootcamp a lot. We've broken, I think, the wall down on web dev already. I think there are enough people in the space who understand that there is a need for entry-level talent at entry-level pay, and then there's a progression that happens as you escalate your career as an entry as a software engineering, web development professional. On the cyber side, we're still in that like Stone Age side of it, because entry level to a cybersecurity manager is the 5 years of experience and a master's degree in cybersecurity. They don't give bachelor's degrees in cybersecurity. Like, that's not even a thing you can do as an undergraduate student. So I think that's definitely a challenge of aligning internally. And I think so much confusion about what happens. I think, Navi, to the point you made earlier, when an applicant gets ghosted, when somebody's in a process and they're like, I don't know why I wasn't selected or why nobody would talk to me. It has very little to do with the candidate or even the boot camp, because I think it's a misalignment with how organizations are putting their kind of position out there, how it's being marketed, how it's being screened for, who is doing the screening. In many, and I think we've also seen over the last couple of years, there has been a rise in the concept of the technical recruiter, which I actually think is a benefit for the industry, because those are people who can become subject matter experts. They may not be technicians. They may have never written a line of code in their life, but they do enough to understand what their CTO, what their engineering manager is looking for, and then they become a proper vehicle for screening. Until organizations are able to invest time and resources, and for some organizations that's just not possible, until they're able to do that, you're asking people to do things that don't really fall into kind of their scope of responsibility. And then you might be missing candidates, or you're not putting through the right candidates. And it's not because you're not trying to find the right candidate. It is because you as a professional internally don't necessarily have the skill set. Again, and then that's a whole nother panel about how do we upscale recruiting professionals to be aligned on it when you're trying to meet the needs of many, many business lines. So I think those are a couple of the challenges that we have seen, I think, from my experience too, on the employer side, about where companies struggle. And I will add one final thing. I give huge credit to all of the recruiting professionals, HR folks out there. they were one of the heaviest hit industries when the pandemic started because everybody stopped hiring. So then you furloughed a ton of people, and now they are being asked to catch up and scramble and refill their own teams for the massive amount of tech hiring that is happening in a way that, like, you probably should have kept them on in March of 2020 to not be in this place of October 2021, where you're trying to not only restaff your engineering teams for critical mass work, but also upstaffing the recruiting teams to hire these people.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well said. I want to clap.
I need to I need to add on to that, because that was so well said. It covered a lot of ground, and I kind of want to contextualize it and expand on what Lesha said. That was beautifully said. What you basically highlighted was the fact that there are many stages to the hiring process, and you guys as developers see this, like the developers in the audience, you guys see this as, first I need to get my resume right. Then I need to send out a bunch of resumes, which is a completely separate step from having your resume right. Then you need to do well on your first phone screen, which is kind of like a soft skills plus the quality of your portfolio and GitHub kind of thing. Then you need to do it on an on-site technical interview, and then there's a cultural fit interview, and there might be like any combination of these. There could be automation involved, like HackerRank. And from the employer side, what that looks like is the exact same thing. There are multiple different steps. And if I, as an employer, fail at any one of those steps, then my entire talent pipeline is broken. So if I suck at screening resumes, I'm not going to find good people. I'm probably going to screen out the people I want. And I'm going to look at the talent pipeline, and the symptom that I'm going to see is, oh, there's nothing in the market that fits my needs. Looks like there's a talent shortage. Right. And that's where that thing comes up over and over again. Because there are like 6 or 7 steps in that gauntlet that you have to be good at. If you fail at any one of those steps, as an employer, you're not going to complain. Most likely, you're not going to complain about the bad job you've done as an employer setting together your talent pipeline and putting in those processes in place. You're probably going to blame the market. Common human tendency, exacerbated by the optics game that's prevalent in so many companies. I mean, I don't blame any individual. It's just how the system works right now. Is there too many steps to getting that hire? And it's already hard in non-technical professions. Like if I wanted to go out there and hire a marketer, if I wanted to go out there and hire anybody who's in sales, I would probably just do a couple of interviews. That's it. But there's so many more steps in technical hiring, and they're just I think employers can really benefit from just breaking it down. Even if you're a small company, it's totally possible. We had to go through this when we started hiring. We were like every other employer. This was before we started Mintbean. We were like every other employer. We'd put a job ad out there. If the job ad was bad, then we would get like 5 applicants. If the job ad was misaligned, we would get like 100 applicants that we had no use for. And that took us like a month to figure out until we saw that, okay, this is like a problem. For a company of our size, a month is equivalent to a quarter in larger companies. So imagine going like a quarter or 2 quarters without solving these problems. And not every company, to your point, Lesha, not every company knows how to hire. So it's a vicious problem. It's a demonic, diabolical, abysmally hard problem. And I don't think that most companies are specialized in recruiting. So yeah, like props to the recruiters because they know this, and props to the companies that have actually invested in their talent teams. But it's a hard problem, and I think that's where, personally, I feel like that's where people think that there's a tech talent shortage when none actually exists. I can go into like the technical side. I won't bore you because people make all sorts of technical decisions that are bad, and then they have to hire like 10 times the number of developers that they want. And some companies, for some reason, think that throwing people at the problem means, you know, if you have a 50-month project, you put 50 people on the project and you'll finish it in 1 month, right? So there's like other problems out there where people don't really know how to hire. And I'm not pointing out one employer in particular. I think every company fails at some point in the hiring process, and it's totally normal. So that's kind of my 2 cents. Sorry if that was like a Debbie Downer statement, but I just
No, it wasn't Debbie Downer. I think this is like the reason why we wanted to do this session is, you know, 99.9% of our community is developers. We're trying to bring more designers and UX people in with our next hackathon. But right now, we wanted to, when we first, built Mint Bean, we were like, we want to get, building a community for developers really well before we bring in. And I get this from like, all the different institutions we work for. Do you support UX? Do you support data scientists? And we're like, it's hard to do a hackathon challenge for everybody. But yeah, like this is coming back to, why hiring developers is so hard. I feel like the four of us understand this problem from various different angles. But when you're coming at it from a candidate perspective, a lot of our audience today is developers. And the frustration happens because you don't see that. You don't see that like not every single employer out there, it has specialized roles where you have a technical recruiter, you have a resume screener, right? It's like there's depending on the size of the organization, how big they are, how complex their technical ecosystem is, how well they understand their own hiring needs. Like let's start with the JD. Like most JDs out there are just shit, like for lack of a better word, are
That's
pretty
because
garbage.
most developers are not writers, right? They're coders. They're not specialized in writing resumes. So it's like the same problem. So much specialization needed to get the job.
Yeah, like
Sorry, I didn't want to break in, but it was like I couldn't help myself. Yeah, it's like a hard problem. Go ahead.
No, it's cool. But yeah, like it's like that's where the problem starts from, right? So when you have job descriptions that nobody reads, you're skimming and you're doing easy applications, and you're doing sort of like every single person that we talk to, including us, the advice that we give is, and so do you guys. I know this because I talk to you all the time. The numbers game, right? It's like you have to hit a certain number. Yeah, you got to do the networking and the quality play too, but if you're not applying, then you're not seeing that. But then at the same time though, if you're just mass applying and you're not seeing whether that job actually fits what you are and what you look like on paper, and you're seeing a bunch of rejections, then your morale is going to go down because you think that like I'm being rejected by everyone out there, but you're not remembering that you're kind of blindly applying. If you're doing numbers and you're getting rejections, those rejections are not personal, right? Like if I hit 50 applications a day, I didn't read every single JD out there, because you can't, like you just, if I had to process, like, let me see what are the qualifications, do I meet them, let me write a cover letter, let me make sure that I network with every single person on that team. So I think that's where the problem stems from. Lesha, I think Monarch, you both brought such interesting points about what hiring looks like, from like the internal side, and why the candidate experience feels so broken. Side note, we're trying to build some solutions that come into that. Our hiring hackathons are sort of like one way we help grads be more visible to the right employers, especially the work that we do post submission. We vet every single submission that comes in, and it's something that our senior engineers actually take a look at. We have a rubric. We're also building a platform that helps employer partners to kind of like vet talent, where you're not just looking at GitHub portfolio, you're not just looking at LinkedIn, but you have real data to go off of. But it's a little too early for me to talk about it, but hopefully we have more solutions that solve some of these problems.
Actually, I'd love to talk about one aspect of it. Lupe, working with developers, you probably see a lot of, you have that background in psychology and in behavioral sciences. So what exactly do developers go through when there's so much uncertainty, when they don't really have a target to aim towards? You know what I mean? Like sometimes the target is just get the job. But I remember when I was studying for the CFA, which I only did like half a level off, and then I gave up. But at least I knew that if I had a CFA level 1 or level 2, I'd be able to actually get a job. what are you seeing on GA's grad side? Like, do you feel like people just aren't like, is that one of the reasons why developers are not being hired, and conversely, why they aren't finding jobs? The same problem. Like, is it because we don't really have a objective standard of what makes a good developer? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think long story short, yes, I think that's a huge, it's not so much a problem as much as like an industry working itself out. Like if you're going to be a medical doctor, right? You know that you have to do X years of college, and then you go into residency, and then you have a specialty, and you know exactly where you're going. As a developer in a lot of roles in tech, the word developer is encompassing everything. It's encompassing the interns, the apprenticeships, DevOps. It's encompassing solutions engineering. It's encompassing all these industries where, I think this is a good chance to have, empathy for everyone involved. Because I think, first of all, everyone who's involved in the job market at this time in history is exhausted. Like everyone who is in a boot camp, considering a career change, just got laid off, hiring, everyone's tired. It's been a really, really hard year and a half and more. So I think just having empathy that like the job seekers that you're experiencing and interviewing are humans who might have been laid off, who have been, laid off maybe or career changing from a different industry by choice, but just put themselves through really, really hard boot camp, a really, really competitive job search. And then they have to start the real challenge, which is their first job. So I think just recognizing that there's not much space to think about the 5-year plan when you're thinking about the first job. That said, yes, there are tons of resources out there. Different companies can provide different, pathways to long-term success as a developer. But I think for someone who's just dipping their toes into coding and then 3 months later is a really good like junior developer, they might not, and this is something we tell them too. It's not to not worry about it, but we say, focus on succeeding in the first job search, then getting to know the company you're working for, deciding if that's a good fit, understanding the growth pathways within that company, and exploring other ones. But I think remembering that there's a time where that job seeker has the space for it, and it's usually by the time they start working. That said, everyone does this differently. But I think also the psychology, that I'm seeing a lot of employers have is that they want to hire great, diverse talent, right? I think companies want to make bootcamp grads successful, even non-bootcamp grads. Like if people want to improve the diversity of their companies because they know that it's not just for, the PR, but it's the fact that companies are competitive when they have really diverse teams, and everyone wins when you have a diverse team. And so I think, people often think of that as very combative, but really, it's more about getting aligned and collaborating. And I think what I'm hearing from the employer side is that they want to make these solutions work. They might not always have the bandwidth to support junior talent, but I think what we can do as boot camps is just encourage them to consider it and help provide them solutions. Full Stack and GA have teams of people who are working every day to make these hires happen. GA has an enterprise team where we actually create hiring benchmarks. So for companies who want to test new talent, like that's a thing that exists in the market. So I think just, everyone is working towards the same solution. But at least to your question, I think there's a lot of exhaustion, a lot of fatigue, but a lot of open-mindedness, and I think a lot of positivity that's happening. It's just all happening at the same time.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think one of the things that I think is really kind of important to note when employers are thinking about it is that you can, and from the student perspective too, you also have to think about what students are quote unquote giving up when they enroll in a boot camp. Many of them are quitting their jobs. Many of them are investing time. And yes, while we are certainly cheaper than a 4-year CS degree from, say, NYU, which will run you upwards of $300,000, we're still expensive. There aren't people who have access to the resources to even pay tens of thousands of dollars to do something. So I think, there is a level of pressure that I think also exists on candidates to find, I think, Monak, to your point, the job, one job, just give me anything. I will do anything. But then there's the competing influence, which I think is also turning the industry around a little bit, is that so many of the students who enroll in a boot camp are not just looking for a job, they're looking for the job. Are you working for an organization that has cultural competencies? Are you looking for an organization that has a mission-driven business need around it? Are you looking, for people where people get along and they're collaborative in general? This is not, even 10 or 15 years ago where people walk in at 9 and they walk out at 5. There is a reason why tech companies were attractive to candidates with their free lunches and their pool tables and their scooters at Google. Like, it was a way of life that people felt like, if I'm going to give up this much time to do this, let there be some components around it. So I think that's also what is changing the candidate experience in a lot of ways, and where employers, I think, have not yet 100% pivoted to. One, because they don't have the time and resources to give everybody a scooter to ride around on. But two, you're also dealing with people who have been in industry for a very long time and remember what it was like to hire someone who walked in at 9 and walked out at 5, put in their 20 years, put in their 25 years, got that, quote unquote, gold watch, walked out the door into retirement. That is no longer the case here. And I think particularly in tech, because so much of what we focus on is around betterment of someone's life. We're creating apps, we're creating websites, we're creating technologies that allow us to connect to each other in a holistic way. And so candidates want to see that in the candidate experience, but both correctly and incorrectly, they're assuming that that's always going to happen. Work is still work. People still have to get stuff done. Nobody loves their job 5 days a week, 7 days a week, for however much you might be working on it. And I think that's an important thing to also realize as well, is that there are parts of the experience that you cannot control. It's not going to happen exactly the way that you want it to, but you can control the things you can control. And I think as long as you create a candidate experience for yourself that's protecting yourself as part of that process, that I think is what drives success in the long term too. It's, I think, what helps counter some of the burnout. It certainly doesn't eliminate burnout, because I will say this, I have been a career development professional for a very long time. Looking for a job is the worst thing you will ever do. And I feel that way about my own job search when I've job searched. Like, I would rather advise students for the rest of my life than ever search for a job independently ever again. But it will come, there will come a time when that has to happen. And I'm going to dread it, but like, you just do it because you have to do it. And I think that's a big societal problem that I don't necessarily know that will ever change in terms of making that an easier, more fun process.
Right? Like, what would that even look like?
I don't even know what that'll look like, because honestly, it's such a weird, is employment even relevant anymore? I mean, fundamentally speaking, like, that's where my mind goes to. I mean, okay, so from a Jungian, like, collective unconscious kind of perspective, or you could even look at this from just like a, what's going on in the world perspective. On one end, you have all of this, what Lupe said, you have all of this uncertainty and anxiety about obviously the pandemic, but also just what's going to happen in the future. Is AI going to take my job? Am I even going to be relevant? And tech is already so, I mean, it's even more emphasized in tech, but it's really a global thing where am I even going to have a job in 5 years? Lots of uncertainty over there. But then to Lesha's point, we're making all these apps and there's so much innovation going on simultaneously. I wonder if they're actually related, like, is the innovation causing the anxiety? And are we going through like the birthing pains of some new way of working where I know there are some companies out there that hire developers on, and they promise them, look, we're going to give you your benefits, we're going to give you full stability, but we're going to place you in different projects wherever our clients need us to be on. So it's not really staff augmentation. It's not like you go to a client and you're there forever. It's more like, you're really, really good at databases. This client has a problem with databases. Why don't you scoot over there for about 4 weeks, work on that problem, and then scoot over to the next client after you're done with that. So there's like this really weird shift happening where nobody's staying at a job for more than 2 years or 3 years. And then you also have this, because of innovation, like, we're able to work on more projects and dissolve boundaries between organizations at the same time. So like, there's this integration happening between different companies. You can even see it with the API market, right? I mean, the APIs, we didn't have APIs 10 years ago, not to this level. And now APIs, like, now we have GraphQL, we have companies that rely on each other's data, they pay each other on a metered usage. It's like you're buying data the way you buy electricity. I feel like the paradigm of employment itself is kind of dated. I don't know if I'm the only one who thinks that, but it's like we just want to solve problems and make cool shit so people can lead better lives. Where does employment fit into that? Like that has nothing to do with employment. They're two separate orthogonal needs. And yeah, sorry, I think I went off the deep end again.
No, that's interesting. You both, oh man, Lesha and Monarch are bring like they're just they're going. How do we bring the world to where everybody has a scooter, and how do we solve where nobody needs employment? Those are the two challenges facing civilization.
This is a whole separate conference. I don't even know who you invite to this.
Lupe, do you want to add anything to that? Would you like to make these challenges a little bit more difficult?
No, I mean, I think I think I would chalk a lot of this up to just the nature of work changing. Like, I think, I just posted in the chat too, like we see so many project-based types of roles, like a lot more people in tech are also being consultants and are also being like agencies, which is, I think, a result of like what we saw in the pandemic was a ton of layoffs really quickly. And then all these companies were like, wait, we still need the work to be done. And so there was a huge shift towards hiring freelancers and contractors, even though about 40% of the tech industry was already freelancers. The pandemic really accelerated that model of work, which is why we see companies who are hiring people. But to what you were just mentioning is like, here, we're going to hire you, but we're going to put you on a bunch of different projects and locations, and freelancers can work whenever they want. And, people can be consultants. So you can be an expert in engineering. You could teach people about this. So like, I think the nature of work is changing. And I think a lot of companies, we're seeing a lot of people hire for contractors. We're seeing a lot of people say, hey, like now that we just have a project we need someone for, that's changing. So I think it's only going to continue because people are taking ownership of their time. And there is a privilege to freelancing. Like, I think until you have a big client base, like only people who either have these projects coming in or who can afford to maybe work part-time some of the time, it's not really accessible to everyone. It could also be a great pathway in. So it can improve accessibility. So there's a whole, a lot of layers to it. But I think, the nature of work is always shifting. And I think, anyone who's kind of stuck in the model of like the past, there's a certain value to it. But this past year and a half has just shown us that we need to be adaptable, and we're teaching our students to be adaptable. We're encouraging employers to be adaptable, and we're seeing a lot of the results of that.
It's interesting. Like what I'm sort of hearing from this is that, and what I'm also seeing from the market is that I feel like a lot of it comes down to how much information and resources the individual has. So it's like I feel like 10 years ago, you would trust the process, you would trust the job application, and just like looking for work was very different to what it is now. Like if you don't have, for like simple things, if you don't have, a LinkedIn page, it's like, how do people even know you exist, right? As a professional, if you are a developer and you're not contributing on GitHub, how do recruiters even know that like this is what you actually do? Like you say you're interested in it, and then like you don't see any activity. And then so that's like there's so many resources out there that the recruiter and hiring managers use as telltales. But I also feel like a lot of the hurdles or just like how to navigate the job search comes down to the individual level as well, of educating yourself on, hey, not every single employer looks the same, right? When you're dealing with startups, it is a very different ecosystem. They don't have the same resources as the larger players. So the turnaround is going to be quick. The person who's going to be reviewing your resume might be the same person who's interviewing you, which is a lot like the case in our company. Or you might move through like 5-6 interviews because the organization is so big that they've specialized roles, right? They've made like you said, they have the technical recruiter who is, so one person will look at your resume, they'll put it in the ATS system and see if you're a match, and then and then they'll put you through the process of like moving you along. And the first person that you speak to might actually not even be on the engineering team, but they're looking for certain things from you when they pick up that phone. They're maybe looking for a cultural fit. Maybe they're just looking for language barriers. So it's really interesting with what the candidate experience looks like today. And that's what I'm sort of hearing from your conversation, Lupe.
Can I tell you a story about how I got hired for like a $95 an hour job? And this was like consulting days, and it was insane. I walked into this really swanky office, sat down. I really liked the team, at least at first glance. Sat down. I'm never going to name the employer. And they asked me to do a technical test. I said, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, you want me to do some React? You want me to do some JavaScript? I was doing my master's at that point, so I was like, I can even do assembler. If you want me to like build a CPU for you from scratch using VHDL, yeah, like I'll design like a full CPU architecture. What do you want me to do? He sat me down in front of this old boxy old monitor, and I felt like I was back in the 90s. And I sat down, and they asked me, you see this little div over here? I said, yeah. They opened up a file. They said, here's the code. I look at the code, and it's like one straight HTML file with a script tag in it. So basically like something that a first week bootcamp student might do. And they asked me, can you turn that red box into a blue box using nothing but CSS? And I did. And that's something that a first-year bootcamp student wouldn't struggle to do. You could probably do that right out of those intro to HTML and CSS courses that some bootcamps do for free. You could probably do it right out of that course. And they hired me based on how well I spoke, the strength of what I wrote on my resume. They never verified, and that one technical test. And they hired me. Now, they were lucky that I knew what I was doing, but it was weird. It was weird. This was like a $95. That's like equivalent is like close to $200,000 a year for, and it was like, why would you not test me? It was so weird, and I'll never forget that experience, because it just goes down to show that it just goes to show that, yeah, I think a lot of employers are just desperate for good talent. I honestly feel like the reason they didn't test me is because they didn't want to insult me, and the world kind of starts shifting when you get more experience as a developer. Like, people start treating you way differently from a junior. And when you get to that senior level, you have Steve Jobs' reality distortion field. Like, whatever you say, like Jedi mind trick, I am very smart, and they believe you just because your resume says you have like bunches of years of experience. And just goes to show, like, employers really don't know how to hire. And I really wish they did, because then they would hire junior developers more, and they wouldn't pay me so much money for being a senior developer. It's a freaky world out there. But anyway, story time's over. That's my story. It was so
No, that's an interesting story, Monarch, because like yeah, there's like funny antidote in there, but like the truth is that some of our friends who are engineers, like when I've seen them switch jobs, like there's a judgment that happens on the technical test that's given by some of the employers. And a lot of folks here are starting out, but trust me, you guys are going to start, even at your level. Like, you take a look at that test and you're like, why am I being tested this way? Like, and that sometimes tells you a little bit about the employer as well, of like how much legwork have they done. And that should have been your first telltale of that company. But
they hired about 30 engineers for UI, for a single UI project. So
yeah. So Henry's asking, and what was the company? But yeah, we won't name any names.
No names, never.
Yeah. So hiring it's complex, and I think that's what us as candidates here in our community, we need to understand, and that's really one of the things that I'm really hoping that boot camps start educating their students more on. And I know that you guys already do a lot with the career coaching aspect of it, but sometimes it's like they also need to understand what are some of the challenges on the employer side. That's what I feel like, that there's a blind spot there. And it would be really nice to see some support being offered on that side, where, you know, we're having conversations of like, okay, well, if you're going after startups, then here's what the expectation should be. If you're going, you know, when you mentioned, I think Lupe, you mentioned freelance and just, you know, contract work. There's, you know, we did a workshop a couple of months ago from, gosh, I'm getting the name of the woman, but she's been a freelancer for about 7 years. And there's so much, like, as a freelancer, you are, you know, you're your own marketing department, you're your own developer, you're your own designer, you're your own legal department as well, because you're dealing with contracts. And you're also like, you're also your own customer service, because you're dealing with the client. So there's so much knowledge that you need to have to be a freelancer, but it's a great skill because you get to work with in production code immediately. But then, like, there's so many things that can go wrong in a freelance gig, where, like, you know, the expectations weren't set correctly. So it's like, where's that balance from, like, making sure that candidates have those resources of like, hey, we're gonna go out there in the wild now and start interacting with companies that are smaller or larger in scale. Where should my expectations be to reality?
I think just to the point of freelancing, because it's such a huge trend and like this is where a big chunk of the market is going. I think the role of boot camps is really, and I know Lesha's team, you know, on the career coaching side, it's a very similar philosophy where it's like, we can provide resources and we can coach you and we can take your specific, you know, freelance opportunity and help you navigate it to the best of our ability. And at the same time, you know, we both have employer facing teams where we can advocate, you know, at least if an employer is coming through us, we're saying, hey, pay these people equitably. Is there anything we can support with your hiring? Sometimes employers really like value all our advice when they're putting together a job description for a role. So I think with our partnerships, I think there's always that synergy with boot camps and employers. Like, it's very collaborative. It's very, and I think we try to help candidates. Every freelance project and full-time role is so different. So all we can do is share the resources, coach people individually, do our best, and then really leave it to them to ask the right questions. So I think there's a huge amount of support, but for anyone going into a job search or particularly freelance, it's also different. There's not a perfect way to freelance. There's not a perfect way to, you know, predict what's going to happen at a startup versus a short-term project, but there are a lot of resources out there to help you ask the right questions to make sure that whatever work agreement is happening works really well for you.
That's a great point. Mary just said that there was a boot camp that includes freelancing course in their program, which is pretty cool. Lesha, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think you have to know your why. We were actually just talking about this, and I've used this phrase 3 times over the last 2 days, which should tell you a lot about what my TV viewing skills are. It's like, who's here for the right reasons? I've been watching a lot of Bachelor in Paradise. I don't know if there are any fans out there or if it's just me and my trash TV habits. But, you know, when you think about being a candidate enrolling in any of our programs across any of the boot camp spaces, what are your reasons for joining? And Trent Rhodes, who's a career success coach on my team, was actually on one of the EON conference panels yesterday. And, you know, you want to think about, why is someone enrolling in one of our programs? Why are they investing all of this time, money, and resources? Because I think that's also visible to an employer. And I've worked with employers for a very long time, both at Full Stack, having been one at Citi, and then certainly at NYU, which has a obviously huge range, although I think boot camps are beginning to approach the range of candidates we're putting out there versus the university space, is that people who have also been recruiting and hiring can also weed out candidates who are not here for the right reasons. You cannot just say, okay, I want a job, or I'm expecting my boot camp to put me in a job. I wish that was the case. It would make my job a lot easier. It'd make Lupe's job a lot easier. We would not have to be on the phone as much telling employers why all of our boot camp grads are so spaced. If I could just say, here, ex-employer, take 30 of them, see you next time you need the next 30, that's an ideal. be an ideal workplace for me. But that is not really the way it goes. And I think, you know, to Monarch's point about earlier about how he hires candidates, how he vets, that's what's happening on the employer side. You don't want someone who's just going to come in and be another cog on the wheel. You want someone who's going to be like an integrative part of your team, whether they're a junior person and this is their first job as a software engineer or developer, or somebody who's been in industry for 5 or 6 years. Employers can really suss that out, you know, and I used to tell this to my NYU students all the time. Morgan Stanley will be able to tell if you don't really want to be an investment banker, if you're only there for the 6-figure salary. Google will be able to tell if you don't really want to work at Google, you just want to say you work at Google. Now, there's nothing wrong with working at Google, but for some people, that's not it. But a lot of people enter the bootcamp space thinking, I have to go work for a FAANG company. I have to develop the next up and coming technology. And I would encourage everybody that when you begin your job search and you start presenting yourself as a candidate, that your why is very, very clear, because then you will take advantage of the right resources and materials that our teams can provide to you. You will present yourself in an authentic and genuine way to employers, and you will end up with a job that meets the qualifications, hopefully the salary that you are looking for, and there will be that return on investment from your boot camp education. And I agree that I think so much of that is freelancing, but I think freelancing candidates actually have a really good sense of why their why is, because they don't want a traditional for an employer job. I would encourage everyone who is looking for structure or does want to go work for, you know, a regular company, quote unquote, you know, for lack of a better kind of way to say that, to understand what it is that you want to get out of that career, and then use all of the resources that have been provided to you that you have from us, but that you've also developed before you came to us, to present yourself as the kind of ideal candidate you want to be presented. And then if you still don't get the job, you know you've done the best that you can do, but also employers are looking at you as someone to say, you may still not be the person who gets the job, but it doesn't mean you can't go back to that company 2 or 3 years later in a company that's a better fit. It doesn't mean you're not building a network with those engineering professionals or those recruiting contacts. Software engineering, web development, like every other industry, is very small. I see lots of names on here that I know of. And, you know, in my next iteration of my next life, I may still be connected to some of you. That's what about building a network and a community is. It's understanding your why and understanding like why each step of the process gets you where you're going, and then starts to build upon like what you're going to be doing next.
I love it. I love it. I can go into a lot of what you said about, I feel like that's actually the right way to network. And that word is used way out of context all the time. You gotta, if you go at it with the mindset of like, I wanna meet Lesha because she said some amazing things, or I want to meet Lupe because she's so amazing, and here's the reasons why I connected with her, or anybody on the panel, right? And you read that message on the other side, you instantly build a connection, as opposed to, hi, I'm a bootcamp grad looking for work. Here's my portfolio. Like, okay, thank you. But like, everybody is busy. Everybody is busy. So it's like employers are humans, and they want to work with the best, and they want to work with people who will align themselves with the mission and the challenges that they're facing and their organization is facing today. But Monarch, I feel like we never talked about the experience of you hiring the bootcamp grads. Like, what was that like? Like, I know we're kind of inching closer to time, and Mabina's dropped the networking session a couple of times in the chat. But I want to just, if you could just kind of talk about that experience of like, what worked and what would you share with either other developers, and what would you share with other employers? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
I thought there we go. I've actually weirdly never been asked that question. So, I mean, look, when you hire from boot camps, you're going to get individuals who have professional experience, Many of them have advanced professional experience in their fields. Some of them have been at the manager level, having earned their stripes and risen to that level. And when you're hiring from a boot camp, you're not hiring apples to apples with a university graduate. And that's important to note. And that's a massive difference. When I hire a university graduate, I expect somebody who I've worked with these people, younger versions of us, basically. You have to train them up on basic professionalism. Sometimes you have to train them up on what's expected of the workplace. It might be their first job right out of university. And when you're training them up like that, it takes a lot of you need to want to mentor when you hire from universities, and it has to be non-technical mentorship where you have to train them up as people, not just as software engineers. When I hired all of those individuals from bootcamp, I found myself not really worried about deadlines, not really worried about whether they can deliver an agreed upon piece of functionality. I found myself deep in the code, working with them strictly on a code basis, and everything else was just taken care of for me. So I didn't have to worry about them communicating effectively on the team. I didn't have to worry about interpersonal issues. I didn't have to worry about any of the problems that come with hiring somebody who's never had a job before. And these were people who were fresh out of boot camp. Some of these boot camps, they would pay for part of their salary. I think we hired a couple on that basis. That was from Turing School, great school as well, and out of Colorado. And I had nothing but great things to say. I could put these people right in front of our clients, and I didn't have to worry about them accidentally making us look bad. That was a massive burden off of my shoulders as a manager. It let me code more. As somebody who loves coding, it let me actually be involved in the code, and it gave me reason to actually look forward to the day because, oh yeah, I'm going to be coding with Kyle today. I'm going to be pairing with Dan today. And it actually let me look forward to my work as a manager rather than dread having to have that difficult conversation about, man, like you gotta show up to work on time. You can't say this. You could have reframed that. None of that. And it was just, it was an experience I've never had before, where somebody actually had previous professional experience, just didn't have the technical chops to do the project on their own. One person, and I'm saying just because that's actually an easy problem to solve. One person who came in from Lowagon in Montreal, she went from knowing just a little bit of React. She knew HTML, CSS. React was like good React, or I wouldn't have hired her. She went from knowing just that front end piece to doing our CI/CD pipelines, doing our backend, doing our databases, working with TypeScript. In about 6 to 9 months, she was doing all of that, plus leading our team. And that's not something that a university grad would be able to do. I don't care how smart you are, you would not be able to lead a team in 9 months. So if you're looking for a team lead or manager level people, like somebody who you can groom up to manager level, why not hire from a boot camp so that you can actually have that, that succession planning. And once they get up to that team lead level, they're now able to manage people, estimate on their behalf, train them how to estimate, train them on the technical stuff that you taught them. They know how to do that because they've done that in their previous roles. So when you hire from a boot camp, like hiring from boot camps, I found to be scalable, which is ridiculously powerful. So I don't think boot camps and universities are actually apples to apples. I think they're very, very different. Nothing but positive things to say.
Sorry, in the interest of time, I want to ask you one more question. I guess this is a question, I'll start from you, and then this is how we'll end because we're at time. Because I know that there's a lot of devs in the room, what would be and a lot of them are coming from secondary careers, and even if they're not, they find it really hard to talk about their experience that's not relevant to engineering and development. How would we've hired PhD grads, we've hired, you're talking about Claire, she was a translator, and we've hired designer and then developer, we've hired somebody from customer service, we've hired somebody from manufacturing. Like what would you say, like how should they present themselves to the right employers so that they can move the conversation a little bit further and start getting like more interviews with the engineering team?
Transparently and proudly.
So be transparent and proud of your previous experience.
100%. And present it in the best light. Don't try to hide it. If you worked at Taco Bell for 6 years, I just mini mentored him. I helped him out on his resume. Somebody who had that background, he was a manager, shift manager at Taco Bell for 6 years, just got his first dev job. I just told him, look, put your experience on your resume, because if you have that, they're gonna want to talk to you transparently. And if you're worried about stigmas, there are ways around that. The stigma only shows up on the resume. It doesn't really show up in the interview if you present yourself right. So transparently and proudly, hence proudly.
Okay, thank you for that. Lesha, what are you?
I would +1 all of that. And I would say, be resilient. You didn't choose this because it was going to be an easy career. You chose this because it was going to be worth it. And it sounds very hokey, but it's true. And I think I can say that as a career development professional, you never know where you're going to end up in life. If you had told me 15 years ago that what I would be doing is working with students in their job, that I would have a master's in higher education and student affairs, like I didn't know what that was. I have a political science degree. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I thought I was going to work on the Hill, until I decided in the middle of taking the LSAT that I was like, nope, thanks. Next step. And then that's how I got into the professional development space. But remember your why. Remember that it doesn't all happen in one day. And if you listen to anybody who has founded a startup or any sort of company, I know our co-founders say this all the time. People can think it's like an overnight success, that you walk out of a boot camp and you walk into a 6-figure FAANG company job. For most people, that's not going to be the case, but most people are going to have worked exceptionally hard to get where they are. So just remember that everything you are doing is moving you one step closer to where it is that you want to be and where it is you're going, coming next. So grit and resilience is, keep those things in mind.
Yeah, thank you for that. Man, you're like my spirit animal. Love it. Lupe, close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation. I've learned so much from everyone here too. And I would just say, own it. Like everyone's saying, just own your experience. You're fitting a very unique space in the market where there's a ton of demand for you. And ask a lot of questions, go for, interview with companies and go for the one that treats you the best. You don't have to settle for your first job in tech. You are in a great position to be nurtured and grown. And there are thousands of people from multiple boot camps who have done this successfully and are crushing it. And that's your evidence. That's your backup, for advocating for yourself to employers, and also just the skills that you have. No one, my favorite UX designers have a bartending background because they're so interesting. They love working with people. Those are the things that make you memorable. So own it, be proud of your background, and advocate for yourself. It's very, very possible in the industry that we're in right now.
I love it. I'm just gonna recap. So be transparent, and sorry, Monarch, what was be proud and transparent, be resilient, and own it. I think that's a great close. Thank you so much for being on this panel. I really, really, really appreciated you guys jumping on. I know that everybody has a really tight schedule, and these conversations can really be very disruptive to getting things done when it comes to just everything that we're all responsible for. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Everyone else, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. We have a networking and recruiting session that's happening right now. Mabina has been dropping hints and links to the Zoom session for a while now. So please do join the other session. These sessions are amazing. We try to keep them short and fun. They're 30 minutes. And then we come back at 3:30 with Proudly Hiring. I'm so excited. Lupe actually introduced me to Every from Datadog. I'm so incredibly grateful to you. She's I can't believe she's hired 122 bootcamp grads. Like blows my mind. So I'm excited to have that conversation with her. Joey Shakespeare is on the call as well. And, if you follow him on LinkedIn, he's one of the biggest advocates for bootcamp grads. And he has an interesting apprenticeship model that he's working on as well. And then we also have Brian Green from App Academy, who is head of product there. He's working on Open App Academy. He is, he's worked on like 3 different ed tech companies, including Pluralsight. So I'm excited to have another one of these sessions. But thank you, ladies. Monarch, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great talking with everybody today.
Take care,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Bye.
That's a great chat. Thank you so much.